The Quick Bite on Archer Street wasn't the kind of place anyone dreamed of working. It was a franchise that had seen better days. Faded yellow tiles, cracked vinyl booths, and a neon sign that buzzed louder than it glowed. The dinner rush ended around 9. By midnight, the place belonged to whoever drew the short straw for the closing shift. Tonight, that was Ethan Cole, 23 years old, community college dropout, living in a studio apartment 3 blocks away. Ethan had worked at Quick Bite for 8 months, long enough to know the routine, short enough that he still noticed how wrong everything felt after midnight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly glow across the empty dining area. Outside, rain tapped against the windows in erratic bursts. The street was deserted except for the occasional car passing by, headlights cutting through the downpour. Ethan finished mopping the dining room floor and returned to the kitchen. The smell of old grease and fryer oil clung to everything. No matter how much he cleaned, it never went away. He checked his phone. 12:47 a.m. 2 hours left. He leaned against the prep counter, scrolling through social media to pass the time. The kitchen was quiet except for the steady hum of the walk-in freezer and the faint buzz of the overhead vent fan. That's when he heard it. A sound. Faint, almost imperceptible beneath the ambient noise. A whisper. Ethan looked up, frowning. He pulled out his earbuds. He'd been listening to a podcast and listened carefully. Nothing. Just the hum of the freezer. The tick of the ice machine. He shook his head and went back to his phone. But a minute later, it came again. This time, it was clearer. A voice. Muffled. Coming from somewhere above him. Ethan looked up at the ceiling. The ventilation grate above the fryer was about 6 feet up, bolted into the wall. It was old, discolored by years of grease buildup. He'd never paid much attention to it before. He walked over and stood directly beneath it, listening. The sound was coming from inside the vent. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't mechanical. It was a voice. Low, indistinct, but unmistakably human. Ethan's pulse quickened. He glanced around the kitchen. He was alone. The manager had left hours ago. The front door was locked. No one else was here. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing off the tile walls. The sound stopped. Ethan waited, his ears straining. Silence. He laughed nervously, shaking his head. Probably just sound traveling from another building. The Quick Bite shared a wall with a laundromat on one side and a closed-down insurance office on the other. Maybe someone was still there. Maybe it was just pipes or ventilation from the neighboring units. He returned to his work, but the unease lingered. At 1:15 a.m., he heard it again. This time it was louder. And this time, he could make out a word. Asterisk help. Asterisk. Ethan froze. He stared at the vent, his heart pounding. That wasn't his imagination. That was a voice. A real voice. He grabbed a stepladder from the storage closet and positioned it beneath the vent. He climbed up, bringing his face close to the grate. The metal was cold to the touch. He pressed his ear against it and listened. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, he heard it again. Not a whisper this time. A quiet, rasping voice. Asterisk, help me. Asterisk. Ethan jerked back, nearly losing his balance. His breath came in short, shallow bursts. "Who's there?" he called into the vent. No response. He waited. Listened. Nothing. Ethan climbed down from the ladder, his hands trembling. He pulled out his phone and stared at it, debating whether to call someone. But who? The police? And tell them what? That he heard a voice in a vent. Instead, he opened the voice recorder app and climbed back up the ladder. He held the phone near the grate and hit record. For 2 full minutes, he stood there, listening. The only sounds were the hum of the freezer and the distant patter of rain. Then, just as he was about to stop recording, the voice came again. Clearer this time. Closer. Asterisk Ethan. Asterisk. His name. Ethan nearly dropped the phone. He stopped the recording and climbed down, his legs shaking. He played it back. The recording was filled with static and the ambient hum of the kitchen. But beneath it, Faintly, he could hear it. A voice. Distorted. Layered with something that sounded almost mechanical. But it wasn't saying his name. It was saying something else. Asterisk, he's listening. Asterisk. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He looked up at the vent, then at his phone. That wasn't what he heard. He was sure he'd heard his name. But the recording said something different. He stood there for a long moment, trying to process what was happening. Then he shoved the phone into his pocket, finished his closing tasks as quickly as possible, and left the building at 2:53 a.m. He didn't look back. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the recording over and over. Each time, the voice said the same thing. Asterisk, he's listening. Asterisk. But he knew what he'd heard in the kitchen. He'd heard his name. He was certain. By the time his alarm went off at 11 a.m., he'd convinced himself it was a prank. Maybe one of his co-workers had set up a speaker in the vent. Maybe it was the manager, Darren, messing with him. Darren was the type. Ethan showed up for his shift at 4 p.m. The day crew was still there, 2 teenagers working the register and a cook named Miguel who barely spoke English. Ethan cornered Miguel in the kitchen. "Hey man, you ever hear anything weird coming from the vents?" Miguel looked at him blankly. "Hey, the vents," Ethan repeated, pointing at the grate above the fryer. "Voices. Sounds. Anything." Miguel shrugged. "No say. Sometimes wind. Maybe rats." Ethan nodded, unsatisfied. He waited until the day crew left, and by 10 p.m., he was alone again. The kitchen felt different tonight. Colder. Quieter. The fluorescent lights flickered more than usual, casting uneven shadows across the prep area. Ethan worked slowly, keeping one ear tuned to the vent. At 11:34 p.m., it started again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was laughter. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A child's laughter. Ethan stopped what he was doing and looked up at the vent. The sound echoed softly through the metal shaft, bouncing off the walls. Then it stopped, and a new voice emerged. This one was different. Older. Female. Asterisk, is anyone there? Asterisk. Ethan's blood ran cold. He grabbed his phone and opened the recorder app again, his hands shaking. He climbed the stepladder and held the phone near the grate. The voice came again, clearer now. Asterisk, please. If you can hear me, please help. Asterisk. Ethan's mouth went dry. Hello? Who is this? Silence. He waited, his heart hammering in his chest. Then softly. Asterisk, my name is Sarah. Asterisk. Ethan nearly fell off a ladder. Sarah, where are you? No response. Sarah, can you hear me? The vent emitted a low groan, as if something heavy had shifted inside it. Then the voice returned, but this time it sounded different. Strained. Desperate. Asterisk, I can't get out. Asterisk. Where are you? Ethan asked again, louder this time. Are you in the building? Asterisk, I don't know. It's dark. So dark. Please help me. Asterisk. Ethan felt a wave of panic. This wasn't a prank. This was real. Someone was trapped. Hold on, he said. I'm going to get help. Just hold on. He climbed down from the ladder and pulled out his phone to call 911. But before he could dial, the voice came again. This time it wasn't Sarah. It was a man's voice. Deeper. Rougher. Asterisk, he shouldn't be here. Asterisk. Ethan froze. He looked up at the vent. The man's voice repeated calmly, almost mechanically. Asterisk, he shouldn't be here. Asterisk. Ethan backed away from the vent, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked around the kitchen, suddenly aware of how isolated he was. How far from the front door. How alone. The voice in the vent fell silent. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at the grate. Then he grabbed his keys, his phone, and his jacket, and walked out of the kitchen. He locked the door behind him and sat in his car for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Finally, he called his manager. "Darren, it's Ethan. Listen, I know this sounds crazy, but I think there's someone in the building. In the vents. I heard voices. A woman asking for help." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Darren's voice, groggy and irritated. "Ethan, are you high?" "No, I'm serious. I recorded it. Someone's trapped. We need to call the police. It's probably just the radio or something. Sound carries weird in that place. I'm telling you, it's not the radio. It's a person. Multiple people." Darren sighed. "Look, if you're that freaked out, just leave. I'll come by in the morning and check it out. But I'm not calling the cops because you heard some noises." Ethan wanted to argue, but he was too exhausted. "Fine. I'm leaving." He hung up and drove home, but he couldn't stop thinking about the voice. Sarah. Ethan didn't return to work the next night. He called in sick. Darren sounded annoyed but didn't push. Instead, Ethan spent the day researching. He searched for missing persons cases in the area. He looked up the history of the Quick Bite building. He even drove to the public library to dig through old newspaper archives. What he found unsettled him. The Quick Bite had been built in 1989, but the lot it sat on was older. Before the restaurant, the space had been occupied by a small grocery store. And before that, in the 1960s, it had been a warehouse used for cold storage. Cold storage. Ethan's mind raced. That would explain the vent system. Old warehouses like that often had extensive ventilation to regulate temperature. But the Quick Bite was a single-story building. Where would the vents lead? He found something else, too. A news article from 2003. A brief mention of a missing woman named Sarah Brennan. Last seen near Archer Street. Case went cold after 6 months. Sarah. The same name from the vent. Ethan felt his stomach twist. He printed the article and drove back to the Quick Bite. It was 3 p.m. The restaurant was open, full of afternoon customers. Ethan walked in through the back entrance and found Miguel in the kitchen, working the grill. "Miguel, I need to check something." "The basement. Is there a way down?" Miguel pointed to a narrow door near the walk-in freezer. "Aye, but it's locked." Ethan had seen the door before, but had never paid attention to it. He tried the handle. Locked, as Miguel said. He went to Darren's office and rummaged through the key drawer until he found a rusted key labeled basement. He returned to the kitchen, unlocked the door, and descended a narrow staircase. The basement was small, damp, and filled with old equipment, broken fryers, boxes of unused supplies, a water heater that looked like it hadn't been serviced in years. But what caught Ethan's attention was the vent. A large metal grate, about 3 feet wide, was bolted into the far wall near the floor. It was old, covered in rust and grime, and behind it, he could see a dark shaft descending at a steep angle. Ethan knelt beside the grate and peered inside. The shaft went down farther than he could see. There was no bottom visible, just darkness. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the shaft. The beam of light illuminated smooth metal walls, slick with condensation. And about 10 feet down, the shaft turned sharply to the left. Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the restaurant's ventilation. This was something else. Something deeper. He stood and examined the grate. The bolts were old but still intact. He'd need tools to remove it. He left the basement, his mind racing. When he got home, he couldn't sleep again. He kept thinking about the shaft, about Sarah, about the voice that said, asterisk, he shouldn't be here. Asterisk. At 11 p.m., he made a decision. He was going back. Ethan returned to the Quick Bite at midnight. He used his key to let himself in through the back door. The restaurant was dark, the only light coming from the exit signs and the glow of the kitchen equipment on standby. He brought a backpack with him, a flashlight, a screwdriver, a small crowbar, and his phone fully charged. He went straight to the basement, descended the stairs, and approached the vent grate. It took him 20 minutes to remove the bolts. The metal was corroded, and the screws stripped easily. But eventually, He pried the grate free and set it aside. The shaft yawned open before him, dark and cold. Ethan shone his flashlight inside. The beam barely penetrated the darkness. He could see the turn in the shaft, about 10 feet down, but nothing beyond. He took a deep breath and made a decision. He wasn't going down there. Not yet, but he could leave his phone. He opened a voice recorder app, set the phone to record, and carefully lowered it into the shaft, using a length of cord he'd brought. He let it dangle about 8 feet down, just before the turn, and tied the cord to a pipe on the wall. Then he left. The next morning, Ethan returned to the restaurant early, before the day crew arrived. He went straight to the basement, pulled up his phone, and stopped the recording. 8 hours of audio. He sat on the basement floor, connected his earbuds, and started listening. For the first hour, there was nothing but ambient sound, distant creaks, the hum of pipes, the occasional drip of water. Then, at the 1 hour 47 minutes and 32 seconds mark, he heard it. A voice. Faint, echoing, coming from deep within the shaft. Asterisk hello. Asterisk. Ethan's breath caught. He turned up the volume. The voice came again, clearer this time. Asterisk, is someone there? Asterisk. It was Sarah. The same voice from before. Ethan listened, his heart pounding. Asterisk, please. If you can hear me, I need help. I've been here so long. I can't remember how I got here. Asterisk. A long pause. Then another voice. The man's voice. Asterisk, stop talking. He'll hear you. Asterisk. Asterisk, I don't care. Someone's up there. Someone can help. Asterisk. Asterisk, no one can help. We're too far down. Asterisk. Ethan felt a chill. Too far down. Down where? The recording continued. The two voices argued, their words overlapping. Then, abruptly, a new sound emerged. A scraping. Metal on metal. Growing louder. And then a third voice. Calm. Mechanical. Familiar. Asterisk, he shouldn't be here. Asterisk. Ethan ripped the earbuds out, his hand shaking. That voice. It was the same one from the vent in the kitchen. The same one he'd heard the first night. He forced himself to keep listening. The scraping grew louder. Then it stopped, and the mechanical voice spoke again, clearer now. Asterisk, we've been waiting for you. Asterisk. The recording ended. Ethan sat in the darkness of the basement, his mind reeling. Waiting for him? How was that possible? He looked at the open shaft, the darkness beyond, and he knew, with a sinking certainty, that he had to go down. Ethan didn't tell anyone what he was about to do. He knew how it would sound. Crazy. Suicidal. But he also knew he couldn't leave it alone. Someone, multiple someones, were down there, and they needed help. He returned to the Quick Bite late that night, after his shift ended. He brought a rope, a climbing harness he'd borrowed from a friend, and a more powerful flashlight. He descended into the basement, secured the rope to a support beam, and lowered himself into the shaft. The metal walls were slick and cold. The air smelled of rust and something else, something faintly organic, like decay. Ethan descended slowly, using his feet to brace against the walls. The shaft angled downward steeply, and after about 15 feet, it opened into a larger space. Ethan dropped into a corridor. It was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, with concrete walls and a low ceiling. The floor was littered with debris, old newspapers, broken glass, pieces of fabric, and uniforms. Ethan shone his flashlight along the corridor and saw them hanging from hooks on the wall. Fast food uniforms. Quick Bite uniforms. Old ones from decades ago. Beside them, clipped to the wall, were name tags. Ethan approached slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. He read the names. Sarah B., Kevin M., Jenna T. There were at least a dozen tags. All names. All people. Ethan's stomach turned. He continued down the corridor, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. At the end of the corridor, there was a door. Metal. Industrial. With a small window at eye level. Ethan peered through the window. On the other side was a room. Small. Bare. With a single chair in the center and an intercom speaker mounted on the wall. And on the floor, scattered around the chair, were bones. Ethan stumbled back, his breath coming in gasps. Then the intercom crackled to life. A voice. Calm. Mechanical. Asterisk, we've been waiting for you. Asterisk. Ethan turned and ran. He sprinted back down the corridor, his flashlight bouncing wildly. He reached the rope and climbed, his hand slipping on the wet metal. He hauled himself up through the shaft, back into the basement, and collapsed on the floor, gasping. Above him, the vent shaft was silent, but through the grate, faintly, he could hear it, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming up the shaft. Ethan scrambled to his feet, grabbed the grate, and bolted it back into place. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the screws. When the last bolt was in place, he ran. He left a quick bite and never returned. Epilogue. 3 days later, the quick bite closed unexpectedly. No explanation was given. The building was sealed, and a police sign appeared in the window. Ethan tried to report what he'd found, but no one believed him. The police searched the basement and found nothing. No shaft, no corridor, just a sealed vent that led to the building's ventilation system. But Ethan knew what he'd seen, and when the security footage from that night was reviewed, it showed something strange. At 2:47 a.m., Ethan's flashlight could be seen descending into the basement, and at 3:12 a.m., it could be seen climbing back up. But between those times, the camera picked up something else. A faint voice, coming through the intercom system in the manager's office. The same mechanical voice. Asterisk, we've been waiting for you. Asterisk. And in the background, barely audible, another voice. Asterisk, he's one of us now. Asterisk. The footage ended. Ethan Cole has not been seen since.